Hi, and welcome to the Space Policy Show. I'm your host, Rebecca Rose. In today's episode, we talk to Chief Master Sergeant Roger Towberman, U.S. Space Force. Chief Towberman is the highest ranking non commissioned officer in the service, the first ever appointed to the position. He will talk to the director of the Center for Space Policy and Strategy, Jamie Morin, about his vision for building a workforce culture, as well as recruiting, training, and maintaining future guardians. Let's go to Jamie in the studio.
Thanks, Rebecca. It is great to be here today on the Space Policy Show with our distinguished guest, Chief Master Sergeant of the Space Force, Roger Towberman. And Chief Towberman, what a pleasure to have you with us here and to have a chance to talk about enlisting our Space Force and what that means for the people who raise their right hand to serve this nation and what it means for the new military service that's going to take advantage of their talents. We are in a very interesting time where Chief Towberman and his boss, General J. Raymond, and Chief of Space Operations, are building anew and creating a new service, something we only do every 70 years or so at best. So a real opportunity to put a stamp on things. And as we're commemorating Veterans Day, the Space Force is still too young to have made many veterans, but it's going to make quite a few in the future, and I think the choices you guys are making right now will be all about giving those Americans a chance to serve in a meaningful and consequential way. And so really looking forward to hearing your thoughts about how that works and what that means. Let me ask you, if I can, Chief, to reflect a little bit on your career in the Air Force. You started as a signals intelligence cryptolinguist, did a lot of hours in the air, listening and observing. That's quite a few years ago. You raised your right hand to stand up. Yeah. As you look to the folks considering enlisting in the Space Force today, what's different for them than from the career that you lived as an airman?
Well, I think, well, first, thanks for having me on. Like, this is really amazing. I appreciate that you guys would bring an enlisted guy on to talk. I really appreciate that. It's neat, and I look forward to the conversation. When I came in, I entered active duty on September 11th, actually, of 1990, and so things were just starting to change. But when I signed up, I didn't think I was about to join a service that was going to be at war for my entire career, right? Which is what ended up happening. And so I think that's sort of maybe the biggest change. Is there's no question right now in the minds of young Americans that this is serious business, and they're willing and ready to sacrifice. Like, this is a warfighting game, and we've been fighting wars, and I think that makes it sort of very different than the Cold War mentality, which was just we call it a Cold War, but it was very different in terms of what is Joe American or Jenny American giving up, and what can they expect. So I think all service should be honored, and all service matters. To raise your hand when you know that conflict is happening is just a little different. It feels a little different. So I really appreciate them. I'm glad that we're still getting volunteers.
When you look at that group of folks that are signing up, and you're going to be taking in pretty small numbers. It's a small service, significantly smaller than the Marine Corps. My sense is that you and General Raymond are really looking to recruit an elite, to be extremely selective. What are the things that you're looking for in these young men and women joining up, and also, of course, in selecting people from the other military services who are looking to cross over and join up?
Yeah, so I think the things that are the same is this desire to serve, this willingness to put the team first, to put the nation first, to put those kind of requirements, above everything else. These are the traits that are ubiquitous in military service. It's why it's such a it's such a noble profession. And so I think that is still there. There won't be many guardians that we send, to faraway lands to be directly in harm's way. There will be some. There is that mission that has to be done. For the most part, it's an employed in place force. It doesn't mean that they're not prioritizing to all the things that all the other services are. What is my commitment to my team? What is my commitment to the mission? How do I think through hard problems? And so I think that's kind of the same. The stuff that will be different, we have only on the enlisted side, only 3 career fields: ops, intel, and cyber. And these are demanding cognitive skills necessary for these jobs. This is elite force. And so we do need those folks that are willing to kind of think through that have the ability to do the math and science necessary to win in the domain, and also that have the imagination, the creativity, the problem solving to master all of that as well. So it's all of these things. These are we've been talking about elite cognitive athletes, right? Like, we really need folks that can do all of this stuff. So it's I think in many ways it's the same, and then in other ways it's different. Maybe not different in specific. Certainly all the services have their elite mental athletes of their own, but this is the only thing we're going to have. So I think it does make it a little bit of a unique opportunity for us. And I think it's easy to say challenge. It sounds like it's hard. The numbers, I think, are small enough that really we can find 400 fantastic young people a year that fit that description and want to serve. I think it really is opportunity.
Do you, as you think about the role of highly classified activity, it's going to permeate the force, even as General Raymond is trying to drive more work down to lower levels of classification, right, where appropriate. Has that been a barrier to getting the accessions you need, or does that work smoothly?
No, so it hasn't been a barrier yet. It's another thing that we have to account for, and we've got less flexibility if it doesn't work out, right? Mm-hmm. I've got no other place. Everyone is going to need a fairly high clearance. And so we are kind of thinking through, can we move that to the left a little bit? Can we start that, before we bring them on board, so that we know, hey, are there any problems is there anything going to trip you up? But we haven't had, it's actually been going pretty well. The Air Force system is pretty good. We know how to vet people. We know the questions to ask. All those services do a really good job of bringing in, quality human beings, and mostly, that's what high security clearances are about, right? They're about character and about high quality human beings, and the rest is, there's a process. There's things that we check, but nobody's bringing in criminals like as the bulk of their force. So I think in most ways it's a pretty regular thing.
Yeah. So you've been talking ever since before the stand-up of the Space Force, back when you were the senior enlisted leader for the U.S. Space Command, and before that at Air Force Space Command, about this need for kind of changing some of our personnel policies, having more broad ideas about the roles of the officers and the enlisted in our force, the roles they can each play and how they work together. Do you want to comment a little bit on that and where you see those things developing over the next couple of years of your tenure?
Yeah, so I think, like I've been saying it for years and years. Our most, in fact, I would suggest maybe the most significant warfighting advantage in the history of the world is the enlisted force of this country. They're professionalized and autonomous to an extent that never has happened, and that none of our adversaries or allies, can do. And so it really is about people. Like the gadgets and the stuff are always important, but the gray matter it takes to operate those things is the most important. And so, I really have been beating that drum for a long time, that the weapon system that lives and breathes is the most important weapon system we have. And so I think that means managing that talent. It means taking care of that weapon system. It means acquiring that weapon system and doing preventative maintenance and all the things that you would do with folks. And so I do think there's opportunity. We kind of started from an elite kind of blueprint of all the military services. Like this enlisted force of our nation is fantastic. And the Air Force has a highly technical enlisted force, and so this is where we kind of started, and now it's time to ramp it up even more. So I do think that there's opportunity for different roles, different relationships. Not significantly different. I think that the laws and authorities draw pretty clear lines that everybody's familiar with officer and enlisted. So I don't imagine that changing significantly. I think the reality of working side by side and similar mission sets in similar ways, that there should be a degree of respect and appreciation for just what those NCOs and specialists are bringing to the team. And I think that makes our teams better. I think that the diverse perspective matters. I think that the team building the connection will make us better warfighters. So I think we're all in on making sure that we get that right, and maybe examining the pyramids that everyone uses. And is this the right model? Not every nation has this kind of officer and enlisted and civilian, separate sort of paths. And so do we have to do that? I'm not sure. Perhaps more permeability, more kind of lateral entry, I think is a good thing. And so how do we figure that out and make sure that we've got the strategic leadership at the top that we need, and make sure that we've got the tactical technicians at the bottom that we need, and use the CSO's fond of saying that he doesn't ever want to say guardians with a capital G, that our civil servants, our enlisted force, and our commissioned force are all guardians. It's all of us together. And so are there ways to kind of build career progression and advancement opportunities that just allow maybe a little different opportunities?
Yep.
I think there is, and so we're kind of walking through that right now. And if we get it right, I think it'll be. I think it'll really help us with retention and people in the sort of a gigonomics world that we live in, right? They want different opportunities, and so I think we're small enough that we can do that. We don't have to kind of lock someone into a path. In fact, I'm not using that word at all. I'm like, that's not natural. Paths aren't natural. It's not how it works. So I'm not going to put people on a path. It's you evolve, right, and grow naturally, which could be outward, it could be upward, it could be. I think that allowing a little more choice and a little more control is gonna help us out.
I mean, you're taking in an entering class each year that is on a scale of some of our larger high schools.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
It's a small community, and you can. Now people stay for 20 or 30 years, so it's a long duration high school.
For sure.
Speaking of school, I had the privilege for about 5 years to oversee the financial management career field for the Air Force, and a couple things distinguished that team. One, first, a really high share of officers with prior enlisted experience, and secondly, a lot of educational attainment on both on the enlisted side in particular. I mean, the number of folks that were pursuing or had achieved master's degrees and even a handful of doctorates among the enlisted forces. It's pretty surprising, right? I mean, and impressive.
Right.
How are you thinking about educational, classic civilian educational attainment for the Space Force and enlisted force?
Yeah, so, I think we've got, we're building these university partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably heard about that. And for the most part, that I think people think of that as sort of an officer thing. But for sure, we're asking that question. How do these university partnerships help our enlisted folks develop? We're looking at all the same opportunities that any of the other services have for commissioning opportunities where I might go finish school and get a commission, to just, hey, can I get my degree? Can I, go and better myself? The goal is we want growth-minded guardians, right? And certainly formal civilian education is one way. It's a great way, right, to grow. It's not the only way. And so, and that's maybe the other piece of this. I want to be careful that we don't kind of build choice architecture that gets people chasing. Yeah. We don't want that. I don't want you to go get a degree so that you can say you got a degree. I want you to be getting better all the time. And if a degree helps you do that, and that's your druthers, then I want to support it. I want to encourage it. We'll have all of the same sort of, tuition assistance and all that kind of stuff to enable that. I don't want anybody chasing things for artificial reasons. And for some of us, I'm in this boat. On the scale of YouTube to university, I spend more time right over on YouTube. And I think that's okay. It really is about every day waking up and trying to be, better than you were yesterday. And if you're breaking out the Federalist Papers and reading them on your own, or you're taking a history class, like if you come out with the same competencies, the same understanding, I'm not inclined to judge you, for your methods. So I think it should be kind of fun to watch how that evolves moving forward.
And again, at small scale, you can do a lot of things that don't work when you're hundreds of thousands of people. That's a great observation. Along those lines, the Air Force at various times in history kind of swung back and forth between prioritizing breadth of experience versus depth of experience, officers and enlisted. Where do you see the Space Force positioning itself on that?
So, you need both, right? You have to. Warfighting is complex, it's difficult, it's nuanced. If the only thing I can do is space EW to an incredible depth, how can I plan at a strategic level? How can I, function operationally? And so we need folks that crave that specificity, that really, like, I love this and I really love this and I want to be the absolute best at this. We need folks that do that. And then we need folks that can stitch all of those space power disciplines together, that understand warfighting, strategically, and also understand people, and also understand that an employed in place mission requires partners with the United States Air Force, for instance. And how does that play into everything that's happening? How is an installation run? All of these things are necessary. And so our intent is a regulated market talent management system that allows, with using that choice and control, and say, hey, if this is what you want, if you want depth, then we're going to give you depth. And if you want breadth, then we're going to give you breadth. And if we think as an institution that we need one more than the other, or we're not getting enough depth over here, then we'll find levers to pull to try to incentivize that, right? And I think we can do it without sort of trying to prescribe all that stuff on the first day of your career, right?
Sure.
And again, back to that gigonomics reality, like, this is what I'm seeing in young people today. They don't want a 30-year prescription. That's not what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to say, come on in. let's let you specialize in something. That's why we're calling you specialists. Let's let you specialize in something for a few years and see how it goes. And if you really like it and you want advanced training and you want to go deeper, then let's send you to weapons school perhaps, or let's give you advanced training. Let's make an instructor evaluate. Let's let you dive deep. If you're like, yeah, you know what, I kind of like this, but I kind of like to try something different. Okay, well, let's try something different. Or perhaps there's a future where our intel and cyber defenders and operators in one space power discipline might have more in common than the intel person would have between space power disciplines, or the operator would have between space power disciplines. I think we're the guardian ideal sort of is aspirationally saying, let's take this on. Let's find a way to use as much flexibility, as much agility as possible to get both the breadth and depth that we need to win.
So if I'm a specialist or a junior NCO working on the GPS system, right? Huge national asset that the Space Force provides. Where do you see, we had airmen in those roles since the dawn of GPS. How do you see a guardian in that role doing that job differently and maybe better prepared for the world we're finding ourselves in than we were 5 or 10 years ago?
Well, I think we've got to. I think there's a couple things. I think in the specific tradecraft, we'll continue to evolve. We've got to train better. We've got to understand that we've now got a congested, contested environment, and how does that change my day-to-day life, right? Like, it's not just about making sure the system's up and running okay.
Right.
Like, I've got to be prepared to deal with real threats, with real adversaries, with real problems, and it's complicated in the space environment. And so I think on the specifics, there is that tradecraft that has to change. We've got, Space Training and Readiness Command has independent deltas to do training, to do exercises, to move us into a place where we can use live virtual constructed training to model those things and really practice. And General Saltzman's team and the Space Operations Command working hard to figure out what does a space mission force look like? How do I kind of cycle between being on mission and doing advanced training? So all of that stuff is happening across all of the SPDs. The other thing, though, that has to happen is we've got to, I think, recruit to and train sort of a more agile mind and more kind of agility culture, right? So that rather than trying to predict what's going to be necessary in 5 years or 10 years, that old game, right? Like, let's try to guess what we need to train you for. That we spend a little bit of time saying it doesn't matter what comes next. We want you to be ready. We want you to have the sort of mental ability, the cognitive ability to adjust constantly, to be agile at all times, to be imaginative and innovative. And so some of it is, I think, more in the general kind of tradecraft and attitudes and culture that say, the one thing I know about tomorrow is I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And how do I prepare myself for that? What are the things, what are the rituals that I can go through as a human to be most ready to be adaptive and agile? So I think it's a kind of a combination of the two things, and maybe not one more than the other. I think really kind of in equal parts.
You talk about having the right mindset for a contested domain and operations. The Air Force has red flag, and Navy and Army have all the large force kind of culminating exercises and training areas. When the Air Force does red flag, in which the space capabilities have played for many years, they have the ability to close down the airspace over a bunch of Nevada.
Yeah.
they don't have the ability to turn off GPS or to, change the services, the communications and other services that are being provided, not just to military members, but to the whole nation, the whole world. As you think about doing high-end training and the mission of STARCOM in putting that kind of culminating training together, you mentioned live, virtual, and constructive training, clearly a big part of it. But is there a secret sauce here to building that, incredibly combat experienced force even before the outset of hostilities, right? That's the lesson of much of the Cold War, is that we needed that combat experienced force even when we weren't fighting all the time. And presumably the Space Force is not going to be in hot conflict every day in the sense that we would be in the event of a major war.
Secret sauce. You always wait, right, in one of these things for someone to ask you about the secret sauce, because that's going to be a doozy of a question. But, I think that, to be honest, the secret sauce is our people. I mean, it really is the Guardians. So what they're doing in Star Command will kind of pave that way, combined, like I said, with kind of the vision and the requirement from the COO and from Spock primarily. I think that we continue to put good people in there and then say, hey, figure this out. What we know is white cards aren't going to cut it, right? Like we can't win. And we've got to find ways to model. We've got to find ways to simulate. We've got to do, LVC. We have to. And so, to me, the secret sauce is accepting that reality. It's prioritizing to it. It's funding those efforts, and it's putting the right experts, the right patch-wearing experts, in the training environment, right, to build it. And so STARCOM's getting some elite Guardians. It's hard at our size and at the pace we're moving to kind of pick and choose where you need your rock stars, but we really have to. You have to prioritize the seed corn. You've got to. So STARCOM's got a tough job, but I think we've put really capable, great human beings there to try to figure it out. So from my perspective, that's the secret sauce, is to say, hey, you can't white card it, so figure it out.
So we're not going to be satisfied by saying, you've lost your space capability, you've lost your compass, right? We want to see how that really plays out. The Air Force made concerted decisions to invest many, many millions of dollars in building up test and training ranges, in bringing units together, long distance travel, long times away from home to do these serious exercises. Obviously, you're not going to take everybody to space to put their hands on their satellite, and they're going to probably be operating from home station even for these kinds of exercise activities. But are there ways that you can kind of build that camaraderie and cross flow of ideas that happens, in the Air Force when you get several squadrons from different bases together and have them operating as a single package? How do you do that and get that cross fertilization?
It matters, right? Like being all together. I remember those days.
Remember when we used to be able to do that?
Yeah, right. And when everyone, Northern Watch was a great example. Like everybody was there. We're all in the same room, like before the push, and then you fly your day out, and then you're all there to debrief. Like everybody. Those were you build teamwork and camaraderie in a very special way in those environments. And so I think that it can be challenging to do that virtually. One of the good things about COVID-19 is I think it has taught us a lot of that some of our fears on that stuff were kind of misplaced, and that you really can kind of stitch yourself together across distances and virtually. That's not the same as shaking hands or going hanging out afterwards, right? It's those discussions, when the day's done, that you just sit around the campfire and talk about it. So I think there's still a place for that. I think bringing folks together will need to be part of what we do. I think we've learned a lot though about how you can do that virtually and connect through, different medium
New techniques.
So we'll keep going. The one I think benefit is that because of the way we do space warfighting, because it is, it's happening here, right, and affecting things there, that I think it does make it a little bit easier to do that. The modeling and simulation, that's a little bit easier. I don't have to worry about.
It doesn't feel artificial.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that's a benefit that we have, and we've seen some pretty neat things, right, and that are starting, like people really coming up with good ways to do that kind of stuff. We saw some really interesting stuff. NASA's done some really cool kind of modeling and stuff that I think is really gonna help us.
So you're again, in so many ways, the Space Force has this enormously complicated task of growing up from nothing and pulling together disparate communities. The Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force all had slightly different enlisted cultures and officer cultures, and because the missions are different and the history's different. Yeah. You're bringing in not massive numbers, but real numbers of folks who grew up in those other cultures. What are your ideas about harnessing, the best of each of them, and then building your own? I know you've put out your Guardian Ideal, and that's, I think, laying out a lot of really good aspiration. But growing to the ideal as you're pulling together these communities is a huge cultural and leadership challenge. How are you wrapping your head around that and providing leadership?
Well, I'm like super excited about it, right? Like I think that's like all of this infusion of different ideas and different ways of thinking and different microcultures, I think is really healthy for us, and so I've been excited to kind of watch it, and it's amazing how sort of quickly it's all happening. We're about 6,600 folks today, but we're bringing in 700 a year. So by the end of this fiscal year, really probably by around spring, once we bring in the sister service transfers in from the Army and the Marines and the Navy, we'll be probably around 2,000 folks that have never worn an Air Force uniform. So all of this sort of infusion, I think, is really healthy for us, and it allows us to kind of embrace this. The other thing that's an advantage is none of these folks were quitting their other service. They were all successful and doing well. Every one of them. We have very carefully vetted everybody. We know what we got. So they're all very successful as airmen, as Marines, as soldiers, as sailors, and so none of them were leaving. They weren't running away from anything. They were making this very healthy choice to move towards what they believed we were trying to do. And so that kind of binds everyone, right? Like everybody's moving towards Space Force, and so they're bringing different perspectives and different ways of doing things and different cultures, and yet they're uniting already just through the act of raising their hand. They're uniting towards a single purpose, moving forward. And so I think this gives us this really a perfect blend. If you think about any good team, you're focused on one ideal, one end state, and yet you have a lot of different ways to approach it. And so we've got to facilitate that to make sure all the voices are heard. But I'm really excited about it. I think it's really cool to have these different perspectives, and we are like we learn when we've got that soldier in the room that says, hey, did you ever think about it this way? And so as long as we as long as who's ever at the head of the table behaves themselves, right, and believes in what we've said, and this is where I think the ideal really sets those values of connection in particular in this case, right? How are we being inclusive? How are we making sure we're hearing from everybody? How are we connecting the entire group? How are we putting the team first? And I think that's sort of our guiding, North Star, if you will, is that if we're listening to all of these folks, we're going to develop our own culture in sort of short order. To be honest, it's already starting to feel different. It's really is pretty exciting.
So in a hierarchical organization like a military one, promotions matter a lot.
Yeah.
Right. People see who gets promoted. You have clear titles. You wear it,
Yeah.
right? And the difference between an organization in which the people serving respect and believe that those who are selected for higher responsibility earned it, deserved it, are demonstrated potential to serve in the higher grade,
Right.
and those where they say, oh,
Yeah.
this is the person who looks good out there, but isn't really getting their job done, or they're checking blocks, but not. It makes a huge difference to how people conduct themselves.
Right.
You get what you reward, you get what you manage to. Especially when you're integrating together these people from different operational cultures, even acquisition cultures, and from the different services. You got to imagine everybody's going to be watching.
Yeah.
Are you? Is that a worry for you? The whole space. Part of the reason we have a Space Force now is a general officer promotion list that had very few space officers on it, right? And the Congress observed that, and concerns were raised. That was one of those contributing factors. How are you thinking about that from the enlisted career field management perspective across these three careers to hold up the right team players who are really contributing?
Yeah, so I do worry about it a bit, and I was actually just a couple weeks ago I was talking to one of the former chief master sergeants of the Air Force, and I said, I think I was set up pretty well. Like, I think I understood what I was getting into. I knew how hard I was going to have to work. I knew the change we were going to have to manage. Like, I understood a lot of what I was stepping into, or thought I did. The one thing that I did not fully appreciate is the weight. Like, I've led organizations before, large organizations, and I loved every single member of those organizations. This is different. And so I do worry a little bit because I feel this weight to get this right. Like, I'm like, man, oh man, like we've got to get this right. So I worry a little bit, but not a great deal. I think we've got a good idea of where we want to go. I believe that this competency-based approach to advancement, to talent management, is the right way to go. We've been forced, because we're bringing in other services, and also even within the Air Force, very distinct microcultures, and we're knitting them together. We've been forced to really analyze any sort of shortcuts or proxies that we might have used when we all knew each other. And so what that has done is created more work, for instance, on a promotion board. Like,
Sure.
Don't look at this, don't look at this stuff, don't look at any of those shortcuts. You're really going to have to dig into these records and really work hard. So it's created more work, but it's, I think, produced a better outcome, and an outcome that...
So it's not enough to be the top graduate from every leadership skills
Absolutely.
Or senior NCO academy or whatever.
Yeah, because how does that translate across services? So when I look at an NCOER of a soldier next May, in our first time that we bring them in, how will I compare their PME to Air Force PME? to a sailor's PME. I can't, right? Like
Completely
it's
different structure.
completely different. And so we're really and we're trying hard. In November we do our first promotion board. That's all Space Force for E8s and E9s. It's the same panel that's doing the board, and these are one specialty. So no matter their background, could have been cyber, intel, or ops. We're promoting one, group of E8s and one group of E9s. So we're looking at them together. What we're doing in step one to make sure that we are, I think, being responsible is that the list will still be separate, so the allocations are still going by curfew, but we're looking at them as one group so that we can iterate on that process and see what we learn and analyze, okay, if it was just one list, do we feel like we've dialed this in, or do we have blind spots that we have to work through? Because what I know is there's super talented people across all of those specialties. But if I look at their records through the wrong lens,
Right.
There may be a group that has an advantage. And so we're working on that lens and trying to adjust it all the while we move towards this sort of competency-based approach, which is what we really prefer, right? I think you have to have a system, and some of the perceptions, that you mentioned, and some of the ways that it goes wrong. When a system focuses human beings up at their boss, it's only a matter of time,
Yep.
right, before there's a perception of that person didn't care about me, they didn't care about their team, they were just focused up. So we've got to have a system that doesn't do that, right? Like I want to measure and build choice architecture and incentives that create people that have people looking down, right, and laterally.
Across and down. Yeah,
How do we do that? And so I think we've got that kind of firmly in our sights. Fleshing it out is difficult, right? It's important, and this is what all companies. I mean, many people are trying to get this right.
Right.
But I think that we've got that end state kind of firmly in mind. So I'm worried. I'm not incredibly worried. I think we're going to do it. We've got really smart people, kind of
A focus item, but one that you think
crushing
you can
it.
deliver on.
Yeah, for sure.
No, that's great. So at Aerospace, we've got 3,000 scientists and engineers who are trying to help make sense of the complicated space domain, and created by the government to be its technical advisor. We're excited to see the Space Force building technical strength and recruiting it for it on the officer and enlisted side. It's an engineered domain, right? We're not.
Right.
You can't run up the hill in space. You gotta launch, and you can't produce the effects, through force of will. You got to produce it through force of technical development and engineering. How do you see this highly technical domain having operations and intelligence and cyber components that can compete with adversaries and can harness all the talent out there, right? I mean, you've got way more industrial base behind you in the Space Force than the typical Army brigade, right? It's just,
right.
They've got tanks, they've got APCs, they got a lot of hardware, but space capabilities, there's no person sitting in there to correct when the hardware fails.
Right.
So how does that change how you think, and what do we need to know? As we're helping the Space Systems Command and Space Operations Command and STARCOM and all the other elements of the federal government that do space, what do we need to be thinking about to do our public mission?
So I think a couple things. I believe, and I think we're in a pretty good place at the moment with appreciation for space, and there's been a lot of things, some things that I've got to be a part of that are getting people a little bit excited. They're not excited enough. I think that the nation needs to be mobilized a little bit more than they are with really how important space is to their daily life, and how important, no matter where you fit in that industry, how important all of those jobs are. I think we're growing in popularity and interest, but not fast enough. And there's still too many people that don't kind of understand, how important what everybody is doing is. So I think we all have to be part of that, right? We all have to be part of this greater public, this national mobilization about how important space is. The other thing is, I think...
on that point,
yeah,
Chief,
go ahead.
I mean, the Vice President Harris is convening a National Space Council in a few weeks. What if you were putting one thing on the agenda for those cabinet secretaries and the Vice President of the United States, what would it be? What would be the most important thing for them to be discussing, where we can work together as a whole government to advance national interest?
Yeah, I think I'd have the Secretary of Education there, right, to say what are we doing, because there are allowing for late bloomers, and there's always late bloomers, right? In any pursuit, there's people that find their passion later, but for the most part, like true virtuosos find their passion very, very early. I mean, not high school early, like children, right? And what are we doing in elementary schools
To build that passion.
To get someone to look at the stars when they're 5 years old and go, that's what I want to do. What are we doing to get 7 and 8 year olds just really passionate about space, so that they begin this kind of pursuit? And what are we doing to sort of, I think, and certainly the science and technology is, I mean, you have to be this tall to ride, right? Like, it's a requirement. At the same time, the STEM brand isn't resonating with all the talented people.
Right.
And so how do we kind of have, I think this is, maybe this is Space Council business, right? Like, but how do we have a holistic conversation about what should the brand of space be? And how do we capitalize? My wife's a registered nurse. Certainly medicine is a STEM field, and yet it's not seen as a STEM field, right? The brand of medicine is a brand of caring. It's a brand of service. And because of that, different talented young people are attracted to a career in medicine that might not be attracted to a career working for a STEM company. And so I think this is an important conversation, is what is space? Because there's things about space, about all of the individual fields. It's a little unfair probably to many industries to group them all together as STEM, right? Because there's things about space, for instance, that trigger the ancient explorer in us. What are we doing to pull on those heartstrings, right? In the Space Force, I mean, we provide a service. Military service is a noble profession. What are we doing to pull at those heartstrings, right? How the things that are enabled by space, from the way that we can predict natural disasters with space weather or space imagery, to obviously space communications or precision navigation and timing. The things in the world that are enabled by those things, like there's strings to pull, right? Like, no, I can serve the world by being in space. It's not just about science and technology. It's about the stuff that's enabled by that science and technology. And so I think there's a bigger conversation that I guess sort of goes in what I said about mobilizing as well, right? That how do we kind of talk about space that gets all the talented, capable people excited, and not just some of the talented, capable people excited, because that's when, right, you're removing one of the barriers to entry is propensity.
Mm.
How do I remove that?
Yep.
Because I don't want that to be a barrier. Like, you just don't feel like this is a team you want to join. That's like the worst barrier in the world, right? That's an inexcusable thing. So how do I remove that? How do I connect to you to what we're doing? How do I connect everyone to space? I think that's sort of a national conversation, perhaps.
Well, that's a powerful and important message, and maybe a good point for us to draw this to a close. I'm incredibly grateful for your thoughts, and on this Veterans Day, grateful for your service, which has some time still ahead of it.
Yes.
But we're lucky to have leaders like you building and crafting a new military service in a very consequential time for the nation. So, Chief, thank you for taking time, and really appreciate you sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much. I could sit and talk to you all day, and happy Veterans Day to everyone. I certainly appreciate everyone's service, no matter your branch, no matter when you served. Your service mattered. So thanks to everybody. Thanks to you and Aerospace for having me here.
We're glad to do it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you to Chief Towberman and Jamie for giving us insight on the development of Space Force Guardians. We look forward to what the future holds for them. Check us out on Twitter using hashtag The Space Policy Show. Sign up for our news and alerts at aerospace.org/policy. And be sure to look for our podcasts and share your favorite episodes with colleagues. We look forward to having you tune into the next episode of The Space Policy Show. And until then, take care.